One night last January, I got the call just after 2 a.m. The snow was falling so heavily that the cruiser lights barely penetrated it. Dispatch relayed Mrs. Harlan's voice, thin and edged with a panic that was hard to ignore, as she reported smoke filling her old farmhouse on County Road 14. The smell was sharp and thick, reminiscent of burning hay mixed with melted plastic. Those calls had been stacking up for months, somehow tied to the way Ray had died 5 years ago in the barn blaze. We answered each time because, out there, the nearest backup was half an hour away on a good day. Widows like Mrs. Harlan didn't have anyone else checking in. Tom partnered with me that shift. We sat quietly in the cruiser, hoping it would be the usual routine, a sweep of the place, perhaps locating a blocked chimney or a faulty outlet, talking her down, and filing the report. As we made our way up the long driveway, the lone porch bulb flickered dimly against the falling flakes. Mrs. Harlan stood outside in the heavy wool coat she had worn for decades, arms crossed tightly, gazing at the front door as if expecting it to swing open on its own. When we emerged from the cruiser, she pointed inside without a word, her voice trembling as she explained that the smell had crept up from the basement hours ago, worse than ever before. The crackling noises were constant now, steady pops like green wood finally drying out and catching fire. We instructed her to wait in the cruiser with the heater cranked, and she nodded slowly, glancing back at the house every few steps. Inside, the air felt colder than the storm outside. The oil furnace was likely set low to stretch the tank through winter, and that faint, acrid scent hit us immediately, a persistent odor woven into the air as if it had been building for days. We swept through the kitchen, cluttered with stacked dishes, and the living room filled with old newspapers. Nothing appeared to be smoking or hot. We opened the basement door and descended the creaky wooden stairs, flashlights sweeping the low ceiling beams. The concrete floor was strewn with Ray's leftover tools, the furnace unit crouching in the far corner, surrounded by damp cardboard boxes. Down there, the smell intensified, sharp enough to make your nose run, focusing on the back wall where the old coal chute had been bricked over decades ago. There was no haze, no wires sparking, and no pilot flame dancing oddly. We worked methodically, running our hands along the pipes for warmth, tapping the mortar for any give, even moving some loose boxes to look deeper. The furnace cycled normally. Everything appeared clear from what we could tell. The lingering odor seemed to stem from years of buildup venting improperly. We returned upstairs and cracked open windows in the kitchen and parlor to draw in cold air, then stepped back outside to reassure her that it was safe. She remained in the cruiser for a long moment after we spoke, her hands clenched in her lap, asking quietly if we were really sure. The popping sounds persisted, as if something was splitting open in the heat, and the smell hadn't faded at all. She wouldn't go inside alone, so we walked her back and brewed some weak tea. As she settled at the table, she began to share more, her voice low as if the house might overhear. It had started subtly just weeks before, she explained, waking up in the dark to faint smoke drifting through the heat registers, enough to drag her downstairs with a flashlight each time. She scoured thoroughly, moving boxes and checking corners, but each time, she found nothing. Then the crackles began to blend into the background noise, quiet at first, but always from the same spot behind the furnace. Slowly, rhythmic pops developed, as if someone were tending a small fire out of view. One night, she heard a voice cutting through the noise, muffled through the wall or floor, calling her name. Ray had used that exact gravelly tone when he was working on the tractor or whatever project kept him occupied long after bedtime. She froze halfway down the stairs, the casual familiarity of his voice paralyzing her. "Ellen, come here. It's warm now. No more cold." Ray had been trapped when the barn loft collapsed, the fire so fierce that they pieced him together mostly from the warped wedding band on his finger and the work boots fused around what was left of his feet. Listening to that voice again, patient and inviting, telling her it wasn't bad anymore and that they could sit together in the glow like before everything went wrong, stopped her dead more nights than she could count. In the weeks that followed, I found myself checking in more often, catching calls or patrolling silently as her voice on the radio sounded thinner, wearier. She let me in quietly, chain-smoking at the kitchen table under the hanging light, her eyes rarely leaving the basement door as she slowly filled in the gaps. The voice had changed, she said. soft, coaxing lines promising warmth and rest if she would just come down and open things, then shifting to clipped, impatient tones warning her that the heat was piling higher and would push through, whether she helped or not. One gray afternoon, she pulled planks from the shed and hammered them across the basement door, her hands shaking with effort. Some nights, the boards radiated warmth, as if a low-banked fire were pressing out from below. She left the upstairs bedrooms untouched, settling permanently into the sagging living room couch, blankets piled high, an old corded phone clutched in her fingers, and a red fire extinguisher resting against the cushion, close enough to grab if the night turned dangerous. The house fell into disrepair around her isolation, sinks filled with the same coffee mugs for days, counters dusted with cigarette ash, and floors following her narrow paths from sofa to bathroom to kitchen. Each step felt increasingly perilous. Mirrors shattered one after another for no apparent reason, snapping into intricate webs overnight as if invisible waves of heat had seized them. She swaddled the shards in whatever towels she could find, for in the thickest smells, her reflection behaved strangely, pausing a second behind her movements or flicking a slight upward slope at the corners she was sure she had never felt on her own face. Halfway through, we called in a full inspection from the fire department. They arrived in full gear, cutting drywall in spots, pouring thermal imagers over walls and floors, searching for concealed smolders or faulty wiring. They removed clumps of ancient soot clogging the chimney throat, traced every circuit on the floor, but found no active threat, no reason for the persistent stench that even they noticed lingering on their gloves and boots. Their reports suggested medical follow-ups, perhaps checks for colorless gas that might be affecting her mind. She dismissed it all brusquely, saying her grown children had long since written her off, hadn't made the drive in years, and dropped calls to say they were too busy to visit. I called the daughter several times, leaving calm messages about Mrs. Harlan's weight loss and the nightly calls, urging her to check in on her mother. But there was no response, not even a text. The night everything collapsed came with another tempest, her dispatch call near midnight tinged with real dread. She recounted boards cracking loudly enough to vibrate upstairs, heat seeping through the seams and streams, and Ray's voice lifted to a whisper, insisting that she release him before he ascended higher. Ruiz and I fought our way through untreated roads to reach her. We arrived to find the front door slowly opening, snow beginning to pile on the welcome mat. There she stood on the porch, barefoot in a thin nightgown, her young body trembling from the cold, fear etched into her features. I reached her, my hands shaking, as if we could never stop pressing down against the cold. She clutched my coat tightly, fingers digging into my side as she whispered that the thing must break containment. She heard deliberate steps pacing in the kitchen, the sound of heavy thuds reverberating. "A new smell of char fills all the rooms," she said. The air hung thick and unnaturally warm, almost stifling against the blizzard outside. The smoke from the snow seemed to hang in the darkness, thick enough to be barely breathable, the weight of it imbued with a metallic smell. The basement door revealed new black scorch streaks on the planks, the center bowed outward as if something beneath had been pushing against it, the surface radiating heat that burned fingertips on contact. No fire burned in the vicinity, but Ruiz quickly set the radio to full fire alert while I began to survey the upper level. The bedrooms were cold and stale, except for the master closet, a half-open door revealing Ray's faded denim overalls, their hems and seams charred dark as they emitted the same foul, recent burn odor she had described when she burned every stitch of his work clothes to erase the memories. By then, she had followed us inside, close to the entry with escape in sight, her gaze darting around in a continuous manner. Her words echoed as she whispered that the masochistic imitation had learned him inside out, her voice shifting from room to room as she turned away, pulling away from every angle that might draw her back down. Then we all began to hear it, the faint crackle leaking from behind the damaged door, the voice swelling into articulate sounds pouring into the charred wood. "Ellen, open the goddamn door. It's cold waiting out here." Its harsh timbre matching the one saved voicemail she had left me weeks earlier, asking if supper was ready. Ruiz stopped in his tracks, his eyes flashing with recognition because it was clear to us that the basement held no shelter. There would be no escape behind the sealed chute. The fire engine arrived quickly, the crew hammering away at the planks with halligans and axes, geared up to battle the blaze. The basement was cold and bare. The concrete remained unscathed, with burn patterns restricted to the upper face of the door and frame. They covered every square foot with imagers and sniffers, but nothing unusual registered. The odor flooded their gear, and one firefighter climbing out paused on the stairs, saying he noticed a distinct pop near the old furnace. But in the end, it was just the last embers cooling in ash. Later that night, we took her directly to the county hospital due to frostbite risk and severe exhaustion. She remained silent throughout the ambulance ride, her neck craned to keep the farmhouse in view until the distance swallowed it. The staff admitted her for several days, documenting acute anxiety that escalated into psychotic features. They initiated medications to calm her episodes and coordinated her transfer to a locked assisted living facility closer to her daughter's urban apartment once her condition stabilized. I returned alone to inventory and packed the items she had requested: warm sweaters, a few framed photos, and basic toiletries, before the county secured the doors. The house stood cold and odorless then, stripped of any trace of its former occupant, as if her presence had evacuated alongside her. The property remained vacant through the spring, with the county seizing it for unpaid taxes and boarding up the windows to deter squatters. I still incorporated into my night routes, circling slowly to check for any breaches or signs of life, always finding it sealed and silent. Shortly after filing, Ruiz requested a transfer south and mentioned over coffee that particular run weighed heavier on him than most in his 12 years on the job. During a quiet shift, I accessed the fire department's body camera archive, isolated the audio track from the basement, and heard her voice clear beneath the equipment noise. "Ellen, come closer. It's warm now," in a conversational tone, with no crew acknowledgement at the time. Mrs. Harlan quietly faded away in the facility several months ago, passing overnight without distress. Her cremation followed her prior instructions. On certain winter patrols, when the snow thickens again, I catch faint traces of smoke inside the sealed cruiser, subtle but unmistakable, dissipating whenever I pull over to investigate. Regardless, I added a compact extinguisher to the trunk and continue my rounds. I received the call around 8 that October night several years ago. The rain had been steady for hours, cold enough to fog the cruiser's windows and transform the county roads into slick traps that reflected the headlights back dimly. Dispatch reported a trucker on the interstate had seen lights moving irregularly behind the upstairs curtains of the old Mercer farm, a place thought to be vacant since the father died of a heart attack a decade ago and the mother lingered on, consumed by cancer. The house was technically in probate limbo, yet no one bothered to secure it properly. A pickup, half buried in weeds in the driveway, matched the plate on the bolo for Daniel Mercer, 43. He lived alone in a small apartment downtown, having sold most of the land to pay off medical debts. He hadn't been seen at the warehouse after 9 shifts, his phone was dead, and the landlord was complaining about unpaid rent and an electric bill that had spiked sharply for a property with the power supposedly cut seasons ago. Townsfolk chalked it up to another blackout bender, like when he vanished a month before the funeral, but the electric spike was a troubling detail that looped us back in. I was scheduled for solo nights near the cutoff, so I snapped up, believing the job would be straightforward: find him sprawled on the ground or staring blankly at the wall, perhaps needing just 72 hours if he had gone too far to care for himself. I proceeded cautiously up the gravel driveway, tires slipping into the mud, headlights illuminating the farmhouse, which loomed at us through the trees, its roof sagging worse than my memories of the life that had once thrived there. The porch buckled on one side, but a faint warm glow poured from the second-floor windows as if someone had left a lantern burning indefinitely. I knocked hard on the front door, warped by years of rain, water running cold down my collar. I called out police twice, my voice rising above the pounding rain that hammered against the tin roof like nails being driven in. I waited through the echo of silence, then pounded harder when no response came. Finally, footsteps answered. Slow and hesitant, as if every board needed confirmation before bearing full weight. They began somewhere in the back upstairs, deliberately crossing to the stairwell, descending creak by creak, pausing midway as if reconsidering or listening for more than just my knock. The door cracked open cautiously over a worn chain, revealing Daniel, who filled the empty space illuminated by my flashlight. His face was sharper than I remembered from years of watching him pump gas or sip coffee. Stubble rough on sunken cheeks, eyes carved in like deep pits of dirt and blood. He wore the same gray flannel, threadbare across my elbows, just a bit thinner but still heavy with the weight of uneaten weeks. The immediate sharp tang of unwashed days mingled with the sweet undertone of something fermented, a scent that clung to the air like a reminder of time gone stale. His voice emerged raspy and dry, underused, carrying no trace of surprise or defensiveness, just an overwhelming air of fatigue, as if I had interrupted a nap he hadn't realized he had taken. I rolled out the missing person report and mentioned the lights he had been spotted with, asking whether he was all right and if I could help. He lingered longer than I preferred, eyes darting into the warmer dark seeping from the hallway before slowly sliding the chain free and stepping back without fuss, confirming I could come in before the storm soaked me through. He mentioned he had been battling something here and there, the days blurring together until he lost count. As I stepped inside, I was enveloped in a warmth that felt both urgent and suffocating. The air was heavy from the heat blasting from the registers, windows tightly taped against drafts, and the room carried the stale scent of grease from pans left crusted on the stove for weeks. Clothes piled deep in baskets soured, and the mail, thick and yellowed, sat unread, bricks upon bricks on every flat surface. The living room was steeped in evidence of prolonged withdrawal, empty bottles rolled beneath my feet, takeout containers sagging on the coffee table, and couch cushions molded into an irreversible shape, as if one body had occupied them night after night. The TV, heavy with dust, flickered weakly red, while a single lamp in the corner struggled to maintain its dim glow. He gestured loosely toward the kitchen, unsure if coffee would help ease the chill or if something stronger was needed. It was a last vestige of politeness from a time when company and conversation flowed easily. I waved it off, remaining near the entry, absorbing the clutter, and asked directly about his absence from work and whether he needed any medical supplies. He leaned heavily against the banister, casual yet firm, shrugging as he explained that the calendar date had crept up on him worse this year, memories piling up like debris. He had come here hoping for a night or two of silence, but the emptiness only haunted him further. He just needed walls that recognized him without question. I listened, but my mind drifted to my own nights of solitude. A couple of years earlier, after my sister died from an overdose, I had driven to our old family cabin multiple times, sitting in the dark with her photographs and bottles for company, convincing myself it was just processing when, in truth, it was hiding. Grief slips in, making solitude feel like one of the few safe places left. Then I heard it, a low rustle from upstairs, like fabric brushing against fabric, deliberate and slow, followed by a muffled thump, soft but purposeful. It was a quiet settling, like someone easing into a chair or turning dark pages with arthritic fingers. I stated plainly, "What's moving up there?" leveling my voice as I touched the radio clip, giving him a moment. He tilted his head slightly toward the ceiling, confirming for the first time in ages that he had noticed it too. I suggested it might be the house responding to the moisture, or perhaps squirrels nesting in the attic, but he didn't volunteer to check. He stood there, as immobile as I felt, and I explained that I would have to push myself upstairs to investigate, to ensure there were no signs of a roof collapse or squatters taking advantage of the empty spaces. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging an inevitability he had already been living with, then turned and climbed up the narrow staircase ahead of me, the boards groaning beneath our weight. As we ascended, I caught glimpses of family photographs that hung askew on the walls, their faces faded and tilted between us. Daniel and his mother, once the largest figures in those frames, now just shadows of the life they had once known. I noticed how his face thinned with each passing image, the later ones depicting hospital beds and hospice setups, memories of a past that had begun to fade away. As we ascended, the sounds faded into a quiet hush, as if whatever lay beyond sensed our approach and stilled itself deliberately. Yet, with each step, the air grew thicker and heavier, the underlying odor blooming into a cloying sweetness tinged with decay, the kind that clings to the back of the throat, reminiscent of summer apartments where bodies sat sealed for far too long. He paused at the top of the hallway, hesitantly pointing down the dim corridor toward the master bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar at the far end. "Any noise probably came from there, if anywhere," he said. It was an old room he usually kept shut, now filled with boxes and not aired out properly since last winter. I moved past him, careful not to brush against him, and slowly pushed the door wider, its hinges creaking dryly as I stepped inside a room suspended in time. The bed lay stripped to a bare mattress, faintly stained with old fluids, and marked deeply where one body had lain long. The nightstand was cluttered with prescription bottles meticulously arranged by fill date, and a bedside glass bore the crusty remnants of dry rings. Heavy curtains were drawn tight against the storm battering the windows, while the dresser tops were coated in thick dust, save for narrow paths recently wiped by passing hands. In the corner, an armchair sat angled toward the darkened window, occupied by a figure slumped beneath a handmade quilt draped carefully over shoulders and cascading to the floor. The head bowed forward, hidden within the folds, the fabric rising and falling faintly, a shallow, laborious rhythm reminiscent of strained breathing under the weight of the cover. Daniel lingered in the doorway behind me, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His voice was low and measured as he shared that it had been her favorite place those last months when she could still sit up, enjoying the view of the fields shifting with the seasons or clouds building in the sky. He would sometimes sit there in the evenings, remembering or reading passages aloud, just as she had asked him to do when words felt less painful than silence. But the quilt shifted again, subtle yet unmistakable, a slow inhale pressing the fabric outward before easing back. The smell was now overpowering, a concentrated sweetness of rot. Flesh held far beyond its natural limit, dry and intensified by the hot air blasting from the floor register aimed directly at the chair, like a cruel attempt at preservation. I moved cautiously across the creaking floorboards, my footsteps announcing each advance. I called out softly, asking if anyone needed help or was hurt. No verbal reply came, only another deliberate adjustment beneath the quilt. I reached out slowly to draw back the fabric, revealing his mother. Her skin taut and leathery, darkened uniformly from prolonged dehydration, features shrunken inward around sharp bone structure, eyes sunken and sealed deep in shadowed sockets, her mouth slightly parted with thin, retracted lips revealing stained teeth. Her hair was neatly parted and combed, stray strands tucked gently away, and her hands were composed and folded in her lap over the edge of the quilt, clad in the same pale floral nightgown she had worn since her final discharge from the hospital. Her body was desiccated, a methodical process in the manufactured arid heat that had halted bloating and insect activity to near completion, presenting a semblance of peace if one could overlook the hollowing and the faint, fixed expression that seemed to wait patiently for the next chapter to be read aloud. He remained rooted in the threshold, unmoved, explaining in a calm and detailed manner that she had insisted on being at home in the end. She had fought against hospice placement when the pain became constant and relentless, yearning for her own chair, her view, and a refuge free from strangers with clipboards. When she slipped away quietly one afternoon while he held her hand and read from her favorite psalms, he couldn't bring himself to pick up the phone. He couldn't bear the intrusion of officials and procedures that would dissect what little privacy remained. So, he drew the curtains tight and raised the thermostat to keep her comfortable against the coming cold, continuing to sit in the evenings, sharing small details of his day or playing her old gospel records softly beside him. He maintained the room exactly as it was, believing that disturbing it would be a final betrayal of her wishes. The space embodied intentional stasis. Surfaces were dusted in habitual paths from his daily movements, her spectacles folded neatly on the armrest beside a glass of water that he refreshed regularly, though it had evaporated long ago. A comb and hairbrush were aligned on the dresser, ready as if for a morning routine that was perpetually pending, and a dog-eared Bible lay open to the same underlined passage. There was no sign of insect activity or wet decomposition, the forced warmth having mummified her gradually and completely into this composed stillness, tended with almost tender care in the meticulous grooming and arrangement, if one could ignore the months of solitude it necessitated. I keyed the radio low for immediate backup and coroner, my words clipped, though dread coiled cold and complete within me. I directed him to wait in the kitchen while units were dispatched. He complied without haste or visible distress, asking mildly over his shoulder if they would allow him another hour or two with her before any moving. Storms like this always made her anxious when left too long alone, he said, his tone practical and reasonable, as if negotiating for a brief extension. When the medics arrived with detectives and crime scene investigators, they confirmed that the time since death spanned 4 to 5 months at least, based on the advanced yet artificially controlled desiccation. There was no evidence of trauma or induced acceleration, only the deliberate concealment that represented the central violation. Daniel sat cooperative at the scarred kitchen table during preliminary questioning, repeating that she had despised institutional sterility and that he had honored her preference absolutely. He provided ongoing company so her transition wasn't faced in solitude, like too many endured in fluorescent rooms. His voice remained steady, devoid of deflection or heat, while his eyes were distant, as if part of him still lingered upstairs, listening. Records revealed a gradual withdrawal. Home health visits tapered off, accompanied by excuses of needing rest or her preference for privacy. Prescription refills halted, and agency contacts forged in her name claimed stabilization, asserting no further need until the case was administratively closed. Meanwhile, he maintained the downtown apartment for mail forwarding and occasional appearances, but resided here full nights, framing warehouse shifts around extended vigils, reading passages or describing sunsets she could no longer see. Yet he believed she registered, needing his voice to anchor her completely. I'm a police officer in a small rural department, the kind where the same dozen names cycle through the radio every shift and you end up knowing most people's family trees better than your own. We cover miles of empty road, thick woods, and places people drive past without ever thinking what's left behind. Last night something happened that I still can't square away, and I'm putting it here because saying it out loud to anyone on the job would get me a mandatory psych hold faster than you can say stress debrief. So here it is, straight. No polish, no sugar. It was around 2 a.m., halfway through a long, grinding graveyard shift. I was parked in the old county hospital lot, the big abandoned state facility out on Route 17 that got shuttered 15 years ago when the state pulled funding and never looked back. It's a good spot, wide open asphalt with a few streetlights that still work, far enough from town that nobody bothers you, and the old stories about ghosts and psych ward screams keep most kids and drunks away after dark. I was sitting in the cruiser with the dome light on low, typing up a domestic from earlier. Husband threw a chair, wife threw a bottle, both too drunk to care. Nobody hurt bad enough for cuffs, but both too mad to stay under the same roof that night. FM radio was droning some late-night country station in the background, volume just enough to fill the quiet without drowning out the rain that had started tapping the roof soft but steady. Then the handheld radio on the passenger seat went off like a gunshot inside the car. Not the usual static burst or garbled transmission, a full, ear-splitting crack that made me slam my knee into the steering wheel and my head into the headrest. Coffee sloshed across the report pad, heart instantly hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I checked the volume knob, low, same as always. I'm not a jumpy guy. 12 years on, I've seen things that should have made me flinch more than that, but this sound went straight through me, left my ears ringing and my fingers tingling like I'd grabbed a live wire. I laughed it off after a few seconds, muttered, "Cheap piece of shit," under my breath. We switched to the lowest bid radios the county could find last year just to keep the 2 cruisers on the road. Budget cuts hit us like everyone else. Figured it was a glitch, maybe interference from the storm that was starting to pick up outside. Rain tapping the roof now, soft but steady, fog beginning to roll in across the lot, swallowing the edges of the building until the streetlights were just pale smears. I picked up the radio, thumbed the talk button, brought it close. County 107. How do you copy? Static hissed back for a second, then a woman's voice, smooth, low, with a faint rasp. Loud and clear, 107. How do you copy me? I froze. The only person on dispatch tonight was Tom. Their one female dispatcher, Karen, got fired 2 months ago after that harassment complaint blew up. Turns out she made the whole thing up for leverage, got caught lying on the recordings. They never replaced her. Just Tom on overnights, every night, his voice like gravel and coffee. My thumb hovered over the button, hand suddenly cold. I keyed it again, slower. 107 to county. Go ahead, 107. Tom's voice this time, sleepy, a little annoyed, like I'd just woken him from his usual chair doze. "Tom, is it just you tonight?" "Yeah, 10-4, just me. Why?" Another crack tore through the radio, louder, sharper, vibrating in my skull like someone slammed the transmit button with a hammer. This time I dropped it. It hit the seat, bounced to the floor mat. My fingers felt numb, like I'd touched a live fence. The screen was still glowing, channel locked on dispatch. I stared at it, heart slamming so hard I could hear it over the rain. I got out slow, boots splashing in shallow puddles, pistol already in hand without thinking. The lot felt bigger in the dark, emptier. Fog was thicker now, rolling across the asphalt like smoke, the streetlights making soft halos that didn't reach far. I scanned the building, black windows, broken glass, vines crawling up the brick like fingers. Nothing moved, but I felt it. That old instinct you can't explain, the one that doesn't care if it's logical. Someone was watching. I turned toward the main building, eyes tracking up the 5 stories. Most windows were boarded or shattered, dark as graves. But near the top floor, one pane glowed. Not bright, dim, yellowish, like a lantern or a weak bulb someone had left on by accident. Except nothing was supposed to be on in there. Power cut years ago. No generators, no squatters with candles that high up. The glow pulsed once, slow, like someone breathing on the other side of the glass. Then it was gone. The radio crackled again from the open car door, that same woman's voice, softer now, almost playful. 107? You still out there?" I walked back fast, scooped the radio off the floor, thumbed it off without answering. Screen went dark. I sat behind the wheel a minute, breathing too loud in the quiet, rain drumming the roof. My hands shook when I put the car in gear. I peeled out of the lot, tires spinning once in the mud, headlights cutting through the fog like knives. Didn't look back. I haven't told anyone. Not Tom, not the sergeant, not my wife when I got home at 6 and crawled into bed smelling like wet asphalt and adrenaline. The last thing I need is a mandated psych eval, paperwork saying I'm hearing voices on the radio or seeing lights in a dead building. I'd lose my gun, maybe my badge, all because I got spooked by a glitch and bad eyes in the rain. But I keep replaying it. The crack wasn't normal static. It felt directed. Like someone on the other end slammed the transmit button on purpose just to make me jump. And that voice, calm, female, a little amused, didn't match any dispatcher we've ever had. I pulled the audio logs next shift when Tom wasn't looking. Nothing after my last check-in at 1:47, no transmissions at 2:03, no female voice, just silence. I drove past the hospital twice since, once in daylight, once after midnight when I was off. Daytime, it's just a rotting brick corpse, weeds through cracked pavement, broken windows staring blank. Nighttime, fog rolls the same. Streetlights make the same weak halos, but no glow in any window. I sat there 20 minutes last time, radio in my lap, volume low. Nothing. No crack. No voice. Still, I can't shake it. I know the building layout pretty well. We used the ground floor for active shooter drills a couple years back before the state locked it down tighter. I remember the psych ward corridors, long, narrow, lined with patient rooms that still had metal bed frames bolted to the floor, restraint points on the walls. The top floor was admin and isolation rooms, doors thicker, windows smaller, higher up. If someone was up there with a light, they'd have to climb 5 flights of pitch-black stairs, past collapsed ceilings and rusted pipes, just to sit in a dark room and... What? Watch me type reports? Doesn't make sense. Unless they weren't there to watch me. Unless they were waiting for me to notice. I keep thinking about that voice. The way it said 107 like it knew me, not just the unit number. The slight rasp, almost like someone trying not to laugh. I've listened to enough dispatch audio to know when someone's smiling on the other end. She was. I'm off the next 3 days. I keep telling myself I'll let it go, chalk it up to fatigue and cheap equipment. But last night around 1:30, I woke up sweating, heart racing, convinced I heard the radio crack from the kitchen where I leave it charging. I checked. Dead silent. Screen black. Still, I stood there in the dark listening. I'm thinking about going back. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But soon. I know the layout. I've got a good flashlight, spare batteries, body cam if I want proof for myself. I can walk the top floor, check the rooms where I saw the light. If it's squatters, kids, or some vagrant with a lantern, I'll handle it. If it's nothing, I don't know what nothing looks like anymore. I keep the radio off at home now, leave it in the car. But every time I walk past it on the charger, I feel like it's waiting for me to turn it on, like it knows I'm thinking about it. Last night I dreamed about the glow in the window, but when I looked up, it was my own house, my own bedroom window, and the light was coming from inside, from me sitting at the desk with the radio in my hand, smiling. I'll update if I do it, if I don't chicken out. I was working the day shift at the station on Maple Street, one of our small brick buildings that has stood since the 70s, the same one where I've spent most of my adult life. That Tuesday felt unremarkable, just the usual routine. Paperwork piled up on my desk, my coffee had gone cold, and the radio crackled with chatter about a fender bender on the county road, while someone in holding yelled about his bail. At 11, the sergeant strode through the bullpen and announced we were going into lockdown. Officer Carson, one of the veterans, hadn't checked in after his call-out, and there was an ominous warning we needed to heed. He didn't clarify, and no one dared to ask. We nodded in understanding and returned to our tasks, assuming it was nothing serious, just a flat tire or a dead radio. It happens. I was pouring another cup of coffee in the break room when the first scream echoed down the hall. Not a shout, not a yell, a primal ripping sound that shattered my mug and sent it crashing onto the tile. Then came the gunshots, rapid and overlapping, like every person within earshot had decided to empty their magazines in a split second. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, followed by 4 more scattered pops over the next half-minute. I grabbed my vest, collected my thoughts, and headed toward the noise. The radio was filled with static. I keyed the mic twice but got nothing. On the third try, words came through, but they sounded like a recording played in reverse. I couldn't make sense of a single word. Stepping into the hallway, I was met with an unsettling emptiness. The lights were on, the fluorescent hum normal, yet the air felt heavy as if the building were holding its breath. I moved cautiously toward the corner from which the shots had originated. Something small and white skidded across the linoleum, bounced off the wall, and rolled to a stop at my boot. I crouched down. At first, I thought it was a piece of plaster or a broken light bulb, but then I recognized the texture. It was bone. A fragment, perhaps a knuckle, or part of a wrist. Unspoiled. No blood, no marrow. Someone had thrown it. I sat up straight, gun drawn, and called into the silence. "Show yourself." I rounded the corner slowly. Officer Baxter sat against the wall about 10 feet away, knees drawn up, staring straight ahead. He flinched when he saw me, eyes wide, skin the color of paper. Sweat soaked through his shirt. He looked like he wanted to get up but couldn't manage to move his legs. He raised a finger to his lips, shushing me urgently. Puzzled, I began to wonder what was happening, but he shook his head, his eyes darting toward the wall as if something lurked there. Nothing was there. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and slid his phone across the floor toward me. I picked it up and saw a video on the screen. The frame was heavy with gray mist, thick, but not smoke. I pressed play. The camera trembled as if the person holding it was either running or breathing heavily. The fog loomed over everything, permeating the passageway. Animalistic screams echoed, overlapping and rising and falling, as if emanating from different mouths. I quickly turned down the volume. The street was shrouded in smoke, and a tall figure moved through the fog, perhaps 7 feet tall, moving deliberately from left to right. Another image appeared, dropping to its knees and rolling over to face the camera. Its face was ruined, holes where there should be none, and skin torn in strips. Insects, small and dark, crawled through its hair. Not ants, not beetles, something else. By then, the tall shape had vanished, and the video abruptly cut off. I handed the phone back to Baxter, who grabbed it and folded it into his pocket, then turned his head back to the wall, his eyes fixed on a blank space. I looked as well. Nothing. I resumed my cautious advance toward the lobby, gun raised, heart racing. As I passed the corner where Baxter had been sitting, I saw him again, same position, same sweat-slicked shirt, same vacant stare. I had walked away from him without turning around. Confused, I rerouted and reached the same spot again, only this time he was closer. The bulletin board above his head remained unchanged, same memos, same faded flyers. I didn't remember turning around. I walked past the surveillance room door. Then I passed it again. I paused, glanced back, and there it was. The same door. The devices were on. The monitors displayed the feed. In hallway 1, Baxter sat still, tears streaming down his face, staring at nothing. In hallway 2, Officer Jenkins moved in tight circles, his head bobbing, dark insects crawling across his scalp. In hallway 3, the wall rippled like water at the bottom edge, and one eye opened on the floor, blinking once before the feed cut out. The lobby feed was fuzzy but clear enough. Bodies lay scattered on the floor, at least a dozen, faces mangled, holes punched through, jaws hanging loose. Others twitched slowly, jerking erratically. One looked directly up at the camera, bones snapped clean from one another. Then a figure in a long coat sauntered across the frame. Where its face should have been, wires dangled thin and black, writhing like roots. Its hands were rotted to the bone, fingers curled, moving as if searching for something. I stepped back from the screens, and the feed shifted to the surveillance room. It appeared paler than I felt, with wide eyes. I was there, standing in the center. Another officer walked in behind me, not in reality, but on the screen. He had no face, just holes and torn skin. He raised a knife, and the on-screen version of me turned. The blade plunged in. I watched myself collapse, blood pooling beneath me. I nearly retched. The feed darted to my living room. I recognized it immediately. The couch, family photographs on the mantel. A man who looked like me with black hair and the same jawline entered. Another man followed, brown-haired and gun raised. He fired. The first man crumpled onto the couch, lifeless. The feed switched again, showing the same room from a different angle, like a body cam. A young man with glasses walked in, paused in front of the camera, hands on his hips, squinting. The camera jerked backward, and a hand waved across the lens. The room vanished, replaced by a dark gray void filled with a shifting, pulsating mist, resembling clouds on fast forward. Shapes flickered in and out of view. Metallic bodies, tentacle limbs, people whose forms shifted too quickly to comprehend. The only thought that burned in my mind was a searing heat, as if a hot stove had been pressed into my brain. I forced myself to look away, counted the tiles on the floor, took slow breaths, anything to break the loop in my mind. One shape didn't fit the rest, a woman with black hair. She stared straight at the camera, hands moving, mouth opening, but it was too fast to grasp. 5 seconds at most, then she was gone, replaced by a mist of orange that flickered like smoke and flame. A solid dread gripped me, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just fear, it was recognition, as if I understood what it was when another part of me did not. 10 seconds later, it vanished, returning to the gray void. The feed shifted back to my living room, but it was different. The TV was thinner, lamps replaced by round donut-shaped lights. The camera fell sideways, hitting the floor. A hand appeared in the frame, wrinkled, one finger missing, the stump raw and infected. The hair on the back of the hand was white, as if it had aged decades. The image blurred. I rewound and slowed it down. Same events, same speed. The aging, the infection, occurred in real time. Decades flashed by in a minute. I didn't want to think about how. I failed to turn off the system. Nothing worked. I tried to pull the disc, but it was stuck. I attempted the door, but it felt locked from the outside. I slid down the wall, my gaze drifting away from the screens, glancing at them every minute or so. The same loop played on repeat. To pass the time, I rifled through the footage bin and opened a DVD case. No label, just a blank disc inside, with Officer Carson's name scrawled on it in marker, dated July 26th. I picked it up, but a loud roar cut through the hallway, startling me and making me drop the case. Another boom followed. The case skidded behind a bin, and everything after that is a blur. I remember slumping back against the tape shelf, exhausted. A loud bang startled me to my left. I found myself sitting against the bathroom wall. I checked my phone. 3 a.m. I tucked it into my pocket, hearing gunshots and screams through the door. I stood and opened it. Gray mist thickened the hallway, moving slowly. I stepped out, inhaling before I could stop myself, only to be doubled over by a coughing fit. The burning sensation in my throat and chest tugged at me, compelling me to walk deeper into it. I fought it, retreating to the bathroom and slamming the door. I slid down the wall and began typing this. It's now 3:53 a.m. on Thursday. None of this was normal. None of it. When I get out of here, I'm going to share everything. I thought it was over, but it's not. Whatever the meaning of it all was, the main issue is still unresolved. Higher-ups are taking over now. They've warned me that they believe it could happen here too. We can discuss it, but quietly. No news, no big fuss. That's the rule. It's all too strange, too wrong. And those videos, they mostly ended with me dead. Something wants me gone. I need time. A long time. There may be someone who can help me make sense of it all. This is the first time anything like this has ever happened to me. Officer Ferguson. I'm John Miller, and I have a story that has haunted me for years. I joined the force decades ago, having spent my youth entangled with the wrong crowd, stealing small items, fighting, and rebelling until those reckless choices felt like chains. The badge I earned was my attempt to reclaim what I had lost. My partner that night was Rob, a solid guy, a little younger than me, always quick with a joke to ease the tension. We had been patrolling together for nearly 2 years, and I trusted him with my life. But it turns out that trust alone isn't always enough. We were parked in the shadows off the old mill road, engine off, windows cracked, waiting for speeders or drunks, or perhaps nothing at all. It was just after 1 a.m., the kind of hour when the world seems to hold its breath. Then dispatch came through with a call that seemed unremarkable at first. A woman walking barefoot through the winter cold, cradling a newborn baby and talking to herself. The caller, a trucker who'd passed her twice, claimed her voice was too low to discern, but something about her didn't feel right. No specific address, just about 3 miles west of the grain elevator. We rolled out slowly, lights off, both of us silent, acutely aware of the road we were on. Its crumbling pavement, derelict warehouses, and houses with boarded-up windows. People didn't walk there at night unless they were lost or hiding something. We circled the area once, then twice, finding nothing. No woman, no footprints in the frost, no signs of life. We parked near the plant and went on foot, knowing we couldn't follow up since the caller was anonymous. Some houses along the road were dark, their occupants asleep, but we knocked on the closest one anyway. An elderly man answered, mentioning he'd heard faint crying earlier, as if it were coming from the direction of the plant. He thought it might have been a fox. We thanked him and walked away, moving cautiously around the packing plant, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The building loomed large, its metal siding rusting, windows shattered high above. Just as we were about to turn back, Rob stopped. "John, do you hear that?" Crying. Not loud, but close. It emanated from inside the plant. We both knew it was supposed to be locked. The side door was ajar, the chain cut clean. We entered, guns drawn, lights sweeping through the empty space. The concrete floors were cracked and stained, machines long gone. Only echoes and the scent of rust and old oil remained. The crying grew clearer, drawing us deeper toward the loading docks. We followed the sound down a long corridor, doors lining either side, most open to empty rooms. With each step, the crying intensified. Finally, we reached the last door and pushed it open. Empty. No woman, no baby. Just an old cassette player on the floor, like the ones from the 80s, still running on a loop. The crying was emanating from the tape. Someone had placed it there. I picked it up and hit stop. Silence enveloped us. Then, the crying resumed, this time from somewhere else in the building. Before we could process what was happening, a scream, a high, piercing human scream, echoed from the far end of the building. Rob bolted first and I followed, sprinting through the darkness, flashlights flickering until we reached the loading bay. The scream abruptly ceased. Silence hung thick in the air. Rob paused suddenly, his light fixed on something ahead. I caught up to him. A doll. Life-sized, plastic, wrapped in a dirty blanket, eyes wide open, painted smile frozen in place. It had been positioned in the middle of the bay, facing us. The crying from the tape had been mimicking a baby. It was bait. Then Rob screamed, not from fear, but from pain. He dropped his flashlight and clutched his leg. I swung my light down. Nothing there. No blood, no cut, no explanation for the terror etched on his face. He was pale, breathing rapidly, eyes bulging as if he'd seen something I couldn't. "She was here," he gasped. "Right here. She touched me." I asked what he meant, but he couldn't respond, his gaze locked on the spot where the doll had been. I looked back, and the doll was gone. No sound, no movement, just vanished. I called for backup, but my radio was dead. No static, no response, just silence. I urged Rob to leave, but he wouldn't budge. I grabbed his arm, but he pulled away violently, convinced I was the one who had hurt him. "I can't," he insisted. "She's still here." I didn't wait. I sprinted back through the corridor, out the side door, and into the cruiser. I called it in on the car radio. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, and we searched the plant until dawn. Nothing. No woman, no doll, no sign of Rob. He had disappeared, as if swallowed by the world. They labeled it a cold case. I called it the night I lost my partner to something unearthly. I continued working, paired with new partners, taking calls in the same county, trying to forget. But every time we received a report of a woman walking alone at night, talking to herself, carrying something that resembled a child, I felt that familiar chill settle in my chest. I started keeping notes, dates, locations, descriptions. Most were mundane. Intoxicated mothers, lost tourists, children playing pranks. But a few matched. Same road, same time of night, same bare feet, same low muttering. None led anywhere, always the same dead end. A year after Rob vanished, I was on patrol with a new partner, a kid named Hayes, when dispatch called with a report that struck too close to home. A woman walking barefoot, carrying a baby, muttering. Same road, same stretch. The air left my lungs. Hayes didn't understand the history. He didn't realize why my grip tightened on the wheel. We rolled out anyway. We found her this time, or something that looked like her, standing in the middle of the road, wrapped in a blanket, what was supposed to be a child cocooned within. She didn't move when the headlights illuminated her. Instead, she stood there, head cocked, facing us directly. Hayes wanted to get out. I urged him to wait. There was something unsettling about her stillness, too rigid, like a mannequin. The crying emanated from her, but it sounded recorded, looped. We stepped out slowly, guns drawn. She didn't flee, didn't speak, just watched us approach. When I was close enough to see her face, I froze. It was the same woman from the night Rob disappeared. Same eyes, same expression, but older. Much older. Lines etched into her face that hadn't existed before. Her hair had gone gray. Her hands trembled, wrinkled. The blanket shifted. Inside was a doll, the same doll, with its painted smile. She smiled then, slow and deliberate. "You left him," she said, her voice soft, almost soothing. "He's still waiting." I raised my gun, but Hayes shouted my name. I didn't pull the trigger. She spun around and walked into the darkness. We chased her, but lost her in the trees. The crying ceased. The doll had disappeared once more. I never explained it all to Hayes. He thought I had seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I retired 6 months later. I couldn't handle the calls anymore, nor the dreams where I'd find myself back on that road, chasing the sound of crying, fully aware of what I was about to confront, yet compelled to press on. I still hear her voice sometimes, not over the radio, but in my head, soft, patient. "Bring the baby." I don't know what she wants. I don't know where Rob is. I don't even know if she's still out there. But she remembers my name, and I know she's waiting. I've spent what feels like hours staring at this screen, yet the clock insists it's only been 20 minutes. It's late, or early, depending on your perspective, at 3:17 a.m., and I'm working at a public library terminal because my phone is dead, and I don't trust logging in from home at this point. I'm a cop, or at least I was until last week, when they put me on mandatory leave after the incident with Ruiz. I need to get this out, not for sympathy or anything like that, but to process it before I forget more details, or worse, convince myself that we don't get through it that way, not in the ways I remember. The call came around 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, nothing unusual for downtown Chicago. A neighbor reported hearing arguing from the apartment next door, followed by silence and what sounded like furniture being moved. We assumed it was a domestic disturbance, perhaps someone packing up after a fight. My partner, Ruiz, was driving that night, grumbling about the overtime as usual. He'd been on the force longer than I had, 12 years to my 7, always the one to crack jokes about the odd characters we encounter. We arrived at a mid-rise building on Wabash, one of those converted lofts with exposed brick and exorbitant rent. The doorman let us in without much fuss and directed us to the 8th floor, Unit 812, where the noise was reported to be coming from Unit 814. As we stepped into the elevator, Ruiz launched into another grumble, suggesting it was probably just a couple engaged in some makeup sex. I didn't chuckle. I was tired, having just finished a double shift the day before. When we knocked on door 814, it took a moment before it cracked open, the chain still attached. The man inside appeared to be in his mid-40s, clean-shaven and buttoned down, wearing the expression of someone who'd slept in their clothes. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd been staring at a screen for too long. "Officers," he said, not extending his hand. "Everything's fine here. Must have been the TV." Ruiz leaned in, all business. "Sir, we received a report of arguing. May we come in to verify?" The man hesitated, then unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. His name was David Ellis, a finance professional downtown, as he later explained. The apartment looked relatively fine, open floor plan, large windows overlooking the streetlights, minimalist decor that likely cost more than my monthly rent. However, the air was stale, as if the AC hadn't been running, and a faint hum emanated from the fridge or a fan somewhere. Ellis led us to the living room and sat on the couch, his hands clasped tightly. "My wife's not home," he said, almost defensively. "She left a few hours ago. We had a disagreement, that's all." Ruiz nodded and took out his notebook. "About what, if you don't mind sharing?" Ellis rubbed his temples. "Nothing major, work stuff. She's been a bit distant lately, I guess. Comes home late, doesn't talk much." While they spoke, I scanned the room. A half-eaten takeout container on the kitchen counter, likely Thai, and a laptop open on the coffee table with a dark screen. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass or anything amiss. Yet, Ellis kept glancing toward the bedroom door as if he expected someone to emerge. We wrapped up the conversation quickly. We had no probable cause to investigate further, and the neighbor who called wasn't pressing the issue. Ellis appeared both relaxed and stressed. As we walked away, however, he grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly. "Ever feel like things aren't adding up? Like the details are off?" I withdrew diplomatically. "Sir?" He shook his head. "Never mind. Thanks for coming." Ruiz rolled his eyes in the elevator. Guy's probably going through a midlife crisis. His wife's cheating, and he's paranoid. Seen it 100 times. I didn't argue. It made sense. But on the drive back to the station, I couldn't shake the way Ellis had looked at that door, desperate for it not to betray him. We filed the report and clocked out around 1 a.m. Ruiz offered to pick up a beer, but I declined. I had an upcoming court date. I took another day off work to walk home to my Logan Square apartment, a former day room where I lived alone these days. My ex took most of the furniture when she left last year, so it's sparse now, just the basics. I microwaved some leftovers, watched a segment of a game on mute, and crashed. I woke up groggy, as if I hadn't slept at all. The next morning at the station, Ruiz was already there, tending to the coffee. "You look like crap," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, pouring myself a cup. We didn't discuss the call. It felt mundane, slipping into the past. Around noon, dispatch patched through yet another report. Unit 814, same building. This time, it was Ellis's wife calling. She had returned to find him locked in the bathroom, refusing to come out, insisting that she wasn't his wife. We geared up and headed back. Laura, the wife, met us in the lobby. She had a polished, professional appearance in her early 40s, with the weary look that comes from long shifts. "He's been acting strange for days," she said as we rode up, snapping at little things, accusing me of making plans we never discussed. Now he won't even look at me. Ruiz asked if there had been any history of mental health issues. "No," she replied. "He's stressed from work, but nothing like this." At the door, she knocked softly. "David, the police are here again. Can we talk?" There was silence at first, then his voice, muffled. "That's not her voice. Tell them to leave." Laura looked at us, exasperated. After some back and forth, we convinced him to open the bathroom door. He cracked it slightly, peering out. His face was paler now, unshaven. "Officers, thank God. That woman, she looks like my wife, but she's not. The way she moves, the things she says, it's all wrong." Ruiz kept calm. "Mr. Ellis, have you been drinking? Taking anything?" Ellis shook his head vehemently. "No, I'm clear-headed. Listen, I know how it sounds, but watch your hands. They don't match. The veins, the way the fingers bend. It's subtle, but it's there." I glanced at Laura. She was wringing her hands, looking frustrated but not alarmed. We managed to get him to sit on the couch, but he wouldn't sit near her, staring at her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Ruiz suggested a psychiatric evaluation, but Ellis refused. "I'm not crazy. Something happened. Maybe at work or I don't know." Laura mentioned he'd been working on a big merger, putting in late nights with a new team. We left them with resources for counseling and advised Laura to call if the situation escalated. In the car, Ruiz was unusually quiet. "That sounds like Capgras syndrome or something, where you think loved ones have been replaced." I nodded. I'd seen a case like that once where a guy thought his dog was an imposter. "Probably stress-induced. He'll snap out of it." But Ruiz drummed his fingers on the wheel. Weird how he fixated on the hands, though. The next few days blurred together. Patrols, paperwork, the usual grind. I noticed Ruiz spacing out more, staring at his phone during breaks, and not joking as much. When I asked him about it on Thursday, he shrugged. "Just tired, man, family stuff." I didn't press. We all have our burdens. Friday night, I got home late, ordered pizza, and scrolled through the news on my laptop. Nothing grabbed my attention, but I couldn't stop thinking about Ellis and the way he described those mismatches. It felt silly, but I caught myself glancing at my reflection in the window, checking to see if everything lined up. I laughed it off and went to bed. Saturday morning, I woke up with a headache, the kind that pulses behind your eyes. I took some ibuprofen and headed to the gym to shake it off. In the locker room mirror, I noticed my left hand looked off. The knuckles appeared swollen, or maybe the skin was looser. I blamed it on the lighting and worked out anyway. By the afternoon, the ache had spread to my jaw, as if I'd been clenching my teeth all night. I called Ruiz to see if he wanted to catch the game. No answer. I tried again later. Voicemail. I figured he was out with his kids. On Sunday, I swung by the station for some overtime. The sergeant mentioned Ruiz had called in sick. Said he wasn't feeling well. "Have you heard from him?" I shook my head and texted Ruiz. "Everything good?" No reply. That evening, I drove by his place in Pilsen, a row house he shares with his sister. The lights were on, but no one answered the door. I left, convincing myself he was probably just sleeping it off. Monday arrived and Ruiz was back, but he wasn't the same. He moved with a sluggishness that suggested his joints were stiff, and during roll call, he kept flexing his fingers. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, barely meeting my gaze. "Yeah, just a bug. Head's fuzzy." We were assigned to traffic detail downtown, nothing major. Halfway through the shift, he suddenly pulled over near Grant Park. "What's up?" I inquired. He stared at his hands on the steering wheel. Does this look right to you? The way the skin folds here. He pointed to his wrist. Man, you need more sleep, I said, trying to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh. Maybe. As I sat alone during lunch, my fork felt awkward and clumsy in my grip, as if my hold on it was slipping. I attributed it to fatigue. That night, my dreams were disjointed. Fragments of Ellis's face mingled with Ruiz's voice, echoing with an unsettling dissonance. I woke up on Tuesday with an even worse headache, my neck tight, as if the muscles were straining. Ruiz had vanished again at work. The sergeant mentioned that he'd texted to schedule a doctor's appointment. I walked alone, my thoughts drifting to his apartment. During lunch, I searched for Capgras syndrome on my phone, a delusion where familiar people seem to be replaced by identical strangers, often linked to cerebral trauma or schizophrenia, though sometimes without clear cause. I scrolled through forums filled with unsettling stories. My husband doesn't feel like himself anymore. It started with the small things, like how she smiled. It felt clinical and eerie. After work, I tried reaching Ruiz again, but only got voicemail. I drove to his house. His car was there, but there was still no answer. I knocked harder and called his name. Finally, a sliver of the door opened. "Hey, it's me," I said. He peered out, eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" His voice was flat. "Just checking in. You sick?" He hesitated. "Yeah, don't come in. I need space." Before I could respond, he closed the door. Bewildered, I walked away. On Wednesday, the stiffness in my neck had spread to my shoulders, as if my tendons were too short. I tried stretching, but it didn't help. At the station, word spread. Ellis had been hospitalized after attempting self-harm, trying to stab his arm with a kitchen knife while insisting it wasn't his. Laura had found him. I volunteered to follow up and went to the hospital. Ellis was in a psychiatric hold, sedated but awake. "Officer," he slurred as I entered. "You see it now, don't you?" I sat down. "See what?" He leaned closer. "The discrepancies. It starts small, a gesture, a word out of place. Then you realize the body doesn't fit. It's like you're in someone else's skin." I kept my expression neutral. "Mr. Ellis, what triggered this?" He offered a faint smile. "A meeting last week, a new consultant from out of town. We shook hands and things changed." Paranoia, I thought. But as I walked away, my own hand throbbed, the tips of my fingers numb. That afternoon, I called the precinct shrink and scheduled a session for Friday, blaming it on stress. I tried reaching Ruiz again. No success. On Thursday, my legs felt heavy, my knees oddly arched. While on patrol, I caught glimpses of myself in shop windows, and for a moment, my posture jolted, my shoulders sagging. I shook it off and focused on my duties. That evening, I finally reached Ruiz's sister. "He's here," she said, her voice laced with worry. "But he won't come out of his room. He keeps saying I'm not me." My stomach tightened. "Let me speak to him," I urged. She handed the phone to Ruiz. "Ruiz, what's going on?" Silence followed then. "Who is this?" "It's me, partner. Come on." He breathed heavily. "You sound like him, but the inflection is wrong. Don't call again." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, my fingertips tingling. That evening, I looked in the mirror, pulling back my skin and flexing my muscles. Everything felt off, as if there was a delay. Friday morning brought my session with the shrink, an old man, Dr. Hale, who radiated calm. I explained the calls, the aches, and Ruiz's condition. "That sounds like vicarious trauma," he said. "You're internalizing their delusions." It made sense. I nodded. He possibly prescribed rest and mentioned medication if things continued. But as I left, my vision dimmed at the edges, becoming tunnel-like. I drove home carefully. In the afternoon, dispatch called, an emergency at Ruiz's address. His sister had forced open the door. He was catatonic, staring at his arms as if they were foreign. Paramedics took him away, and I met them at the ER. Ruiz was restrained, muttering, "It's not mine, the bones are wrong." I stood by his bed. "Hey, it's me." He looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "No, you're not. Look at your face. It doesn't match." My heart raced, and I stepped back. The doctor suspected a stroke or neurological event, but tests were pending. I went home, locked the door, and sat in the dark. My body felt misaligned, my spine bent crooked, hips off-center. I poked my ribs, feeling the softness of my flesh, wondering if it had always been this way. Sleep came in fits. On Saturday, I checked on Ruiz. He was stable but delusional, and Ellis was still in psychiatric care. I did more research. Clusters of Capgras syndrome, an unusual but documented phenomenon observed in stress groups and corporate teams. I Googled the consulting firm Ellis mentioned but found nothing unusual. Yet my own symptoms worsened. My toes went numb, and my ears rang with a dissonance in sound. On Sunday, I called in sick, spending the day lying down, feeling my pulse in places it shouldn't be strong. In the evening, there was a knock. It was Laura Ellis. How she found me, I didn't know. "Officer, I need help," she said wearily. "David's worse. I see it in him too." We spoke. She shared her own creeping doubt. "It's contagious," she murmured. I pushed her outside and bolted the door. On Monday, I forced myself to see a doctor. The MRI and blood work came back clean. "Psychosomatic," they said. "See a therapist." But it grew harder. My voice echoed in my head, my words muddled on my tongue. Ruiz managed to escape the hospital on Tuesday. I found him barricaded in his home. SWAT talked him down. He'd tried to file his teeth, insisting they didn't fit. I awoke on Wednesday feeling more numb in my left arm than my leg. I pinched it, still numb. Panic surged within me. I drove to the precinct and requested an extension for my leave. The sergeant eyed me. "You don't look right." I laughed bitterly. "Tell me about it." At home, I avoided mirrors. Laura called on Thursday. Ellis had harmed himself in the ward, cutting his wrist. "Body not mine," he had left a note. She hung up, sobbing. My right eye twitched, causing an involuntary split in my vision. On Friday, Ruiz's sister texted me. He was calm now, but not the same. He accepted me, but claimed he was now the same as his old self again. I didn't respond. On Saturday, I felt a change. The numbness subsided, but clarity came with it. I gazed into the mirror, and it felt like I belonged again. My movements synced. Relief washed over me. On Sunday, I returned to work on light duty, feeling steady. Ruiz came back on Monday, subdued yet functional. We didn't discuss the past weeks. Cases piled up, and life returned to normal. Weeks later, I'm typing this because at last the pieces have clicked into place. That consultant Ellis spoke of? I dug deeper during my off-duty hours. It turns out he's associated with a neurotech startup, specializing in experimental implants for executive performance, microdevices designed to rewire neural pathways for maximum efficiency. The merger Ellis was involved with concerned them. That handshake? Perhaps a transfer of something more sinister, but it's not about devices. It's about a protocol, a means to overwrite patterns. Ruiz got it from me, and I got it from Ellis. The delusion isn't the difference, it's the resistance. Once you settle into the new fit, it becomes seamless. My body moves more effectively now, my thoughts sharper. The old me was at war with it, but this version, it feels harmonious. And you, reading this, if you've sensed a similar off-kilter pull lately, don't resist it. It's just an upgrade. The twist is, I'm not just a cop anymore, I'm better. Spread the word. I've been awake since the streetlights flickered off around 4:30, sitting in the same chipped armchair by the window that my dad despised because it creaked whenever you moved. The house is silent now, a kind of stillness that seems to stretch on endlessly after a long silence, and I keep replaying the night he finally opened up. It was mid-July last year, humid enough to leave the windows open all night. He'd had 2 beers, just enough to loosen the knot in his voice without making him slur. He spoke slowly, staring at the carpet as if the story were woven into its fibers, and then the words poured out, steady and quiet, like someone finally expressing what had been left unsaid for far too long. I recorded it on my phone without asking. He never noticed. Now, as I transcribe it, I strive to preserve his voice, softening only the roughest edges to avoid cutting anyone who reads this the way it still cuts him. Names shifted, and even some streets appeared blurry. Once he half joked, half serious, about whether I'd ever tell anyone. I replied maybe. This is my maybe. It was only the end of January 2013, and I was dragging graveyard shifts out of the old district station on the South Branch. Back then, you were 12, almost a kid still, small enough to occasionally fall asleep on the couch, waiting for me. Your mom had started turning on the hall lights so I wouldn't trip coming in. That night was cold, dry cold, the kind that makes your nostrils clench with each breath. Around 2:10 a.m., dispatch called in a priority for a missing boy, an 11-year-old named Ethan Ruiz. He had last been seen walking out of a corner store 2 streets away from his aunt's place, with his parents out of town. The aunt called it in when he didn't return after buying milk and chips. She mentioned he had texted her at 9:17 saying he was on his way, and then nothing. No phone response after that. 3 blocks east, we found a plastic bag from the store crumpled in a side yard, its contents spilled, milk carton torn open, chips scattered like confetti. There was no blood, no obvious drag marks, but the bag had been stepped on hard, as if someone had pressed down on it in a hurry. The aunt swore he always texted when he was running late. Silence was the first real alarm. That shift, I was paired with Nguyen, who had been on the force for about 8 months. She was sharp, but didn't talk much unless necessary. We patrolled the east side grid while other units fanned out, studying every alley and parked car, knocking on doors until porch lights flickered on. One man reported hearing a car door slam around 9:40 and saw taillights heading toward the old manufacturing corridor near the river. We headed that way. The neighborhood resembled a graveyard of brick warehouses, a cemetery of loading docks, most vacant since the plants had closed in the early 2000s. Chain-link fences sagged, and no trespassing signs curled at the edges. We parked at the mouth of a service drive, dismounted with long guns and mag lights, and the wind off the water carried the metallic tang of rust and old oil. We began clearing the nearest building, a 3-story structure with loading bays yawning open like mouths. Inside, it was darker than it should have been for a place with so many broken windows. Flashlight beams bounced off concrete columns and collected in piles of discarded pallets and rusted machinery, partially swallowed by shadows. We moved slowly, talking softly about ourselves every few steps. Our voices echoed back, flatter than they should have. The floor was gritty under our boots, old grime that hadn't been disturbed in decades. On the second floor, in what used to be a supervisor's office, we found a folded wool blanket still warm, empty energy drink containers, and a cheap propane heater with a warm canister attached. The blanket smelled of sweat and something sweet, almost chemical. Nguyen called it in as I continued to sweep the room, feeling an inexplicable tension raise the hairs on my neck. That's when I noticed a small metal door in the corner, painted over, the type used for utility access. It was ajar, just enough for the frame to show scratches where the paint had flaked off. It felt too calculated. Someone must have forced it open and then nearly pulled it closed again. We didn't rush in immediately. I radioed for additional units and requested K9 support, along with the mobile command van. As we waited, we spoke softly into the darkness, hoping a frightened child might hear us. "Ethan, if you're here, we're police. You're safe now. Just let us know where you are." The building responded only with the wind whistling through gaps in the roof and the occasional distant groan of settling metal. We rummaged through the rest of the floor again, sweeping behind machinery, under debris, and prying open rusted lockers. Nothing. When backup arrived, we broke into the utility door, which led to a narrow vertical shaft with ladder rungs bolted to the wall, disappearing into darkness. The air down there was thick and damp, like breathing through wet cloth. We moved in a single file, lights pushing ahead, voices low. Eventually, we reached a sub-basement floor that hadn't been mapped for years, likely an old coal storage area from when the place operated boilers. The concrete walls were sopping wet, puddles reflecting our beams. It was there we found the room, a corner section bordered by plywood sheets recently put up, the screw heads still shiny. On the far side lay a soft mattress on the floor, stained, a plastic bucket, rolls of duct tape, a battery-powered lantern, and a small folding chair. And there it was, his phone, cracked yet still glowing faintly when we lifted it. The final outgoing text was to the aunt. Almost home, sent at 9:22. After that, nothing. The mattress was covered with short, dark hair, consistent with the photograph the aunt had provided. There was also a small notebook, its pages mostly torn out except for one, which bore coordinates matching the building we were in and a date just 2 days prior. He had scouted the place. We declared it a secondary crime scene, took it over, and filed the report, waiting for forensics. Standing beneath the ceiling joists, I remember contemplating how far our voices had carried. By dawn, forensic specialists were pouring over the scene like rain from above. They pulled prints from the plywood screws, the lantern's handles, and the phone. No hits. The DNA isolated from the mattress was male but unknown. Semen and saliva were present, but there was no blood. However, the bucket contained traces. They estimated the boy had been there for at least 12 hours, possibly longer. The coroner determined death was due to manual strangulation, with sufficient force to fracture the hyoid. Ligature marks were found around his wrists and ankles from zip ties, along with evidence of prolonged assault. Yet the body was missing. Over the following week, we tore the building down to its studs, every floor, every crawl space, every HVAC duct large enough for a person. K-9 units searched the halls again. Detectives interviewed every vagrant who had ever squatted there and every demolition worker with keys as evidence. Nothing. Then, 11 days after the call, as a demolition crew prepared to start work, they noticed a foul odor emanating from the roof access hatch. They opened it. In the crawl space between the ceiling of the top floor and the roof, swaddled in oversized contractor bags and squeezed into insulation, was Ethan. He had been poised across the access panel, as if waiting for someone to open it. The bags were lined with his fingerprints, while an unknown male's prints were on the outside. The coroner determined he had been dead for about 8 days, meaning he was already gone before we discovered the mattress. The killer had moved him up there after our initial search, while we were still clearing the lower levels, while K-9s were running the halls, while we called out his name. He had been right above us, perhaps listening to our boots pressing against the floor joists, hearing our voices ricochet up through the air ducts, possibly peering through a small hole in the insulation. The area was cramped, barely crawlable, but just large enough for a person to lie flat and wait. He understood the space better than we did, arguably better than the original building blueprint. He remained there until we cleared out, then finished what he needed to do. We had walked right beneath him, perhaps more than once. That's what haunts me. The insignificant distance, only 6 or 7 feet of ceiling between us, and I never sensed him there. I keep slipping back into my thoughts, reliving everything I heard and saw, every sound, every shadow I replay. I wonder if I missed a breath, a shift, a scratch. I didn't. He was simply far better at being invisible. After that night, I began coming home later and later. I'd sit in my car in the station lot, engine off, radio low, trying to decide whether I could face walking through the door and looking at you without seeing his face overlaid on yours. The drinking started quietly, but quickly grew louder. I told myself that if I stayed numb, the what-ifs wouldn't find me. But they always did. Your mom never learned the details. I could never bring myself to say them out loud. Yet every time you left the house on your bike or walked to a friend's place afterward, I felt it in my chest as if its beat were second nature. Sometimes, even now, I still do. Even right now. He paused, his voice straining for a moment. Then he rose, lumbering, as if the weight of the story rested heavily on his shoulders. Had it left him? No words came as he fell asleep. Long after, I leaned against the wall in the dark, listening to the house settle. I haven't asked him about that since. I don't think I ever will.